What is up, everybody? Escape211 here, and today we are doing another Is It Good video, and we're going to be focusing on the Thermal Lance. Now, I don't talk much about this weapon, and you probably don't see me use it much, so I'm guessing most of you will think I will say it's not good. Well, this weapon definitely has some shortcomings, but I actually think it leans more in the good category, so we're going to say that, yeah, the Thermal Lance is pretty good. But like I said, there's shortcomings, so we're going to talk a little bit about those, and then talk about why this is a good weapon. So here we go. Number 1, low energy set. I've talked about this with previous weapon sets before, but 2, 4, and 6 base energy sets are not great. Just because 2 of those weapons at the 2 and 4 are not going to be that useful for you except for just the very early game. Later on, you might find you have a 16 weapon like a railgun that you might put, I don't know, an RPG-2 or a Thermal Lance 2 on, but you're not really going to expect much out of that weapon. You're kind of just filling the slot. These are not weapons that you are going to invest in. The only one you may invest in is the 6, and we're going to talk about that one a bit more later, but there's really only that one that redeems the whole set, so overall, it is not a great energy set. Number 2, high sustain, low damage. Now, generally, I believe there's 2 categories of damage in this game, and that would be burst and sustained damage. And generally, I favor burst damage because it means you're doing more damage and you're exposing yourself less. So that's generally what we like. So as a sustained weapon, this kind of already has a knock against it. But of the sustained weapons that we have, this one does some of the lowest damage in the game. You're not going to get too many kill streaks with this weapon. It's just not designed that way. Now, of course, you can pair it with some better weapons to kind of take some benefit of its overheat ability, but overall, it's not going to do that great of numbers on its own, and you're going to have to rely on other weapons and your teammates to do most of that work for you. Other sustained weapons do far more, and even after you hit overheat, the numbers still don't really justify it on their own. And generally, I try to classify weapons on ones that I would run on my own for general use. Things like missile racks and long arms and all that, you generally use all the time. The Thermal Lance is just not one of those weapons you're going to be using all the time. It has some specialized cases, but that means it's not going to be as favored as those regular weapons that you run all the time. Number 3, not the best overheat weapon. Now, the main reason you're going to run a Thermal Lance is for its overheat ability. You're not expecting much damage out of it, like we said. So you want to do the overheat effect, but there are other weapons, or namely another weapon specifically, that also does overheat, and that is the long arm. Now think about it, the long arm is a more damaging weapon. It's burst damage, which already is a great thing, and when you land overheat, it's instant. You don't have to keep on your target like you do in the Thermal Lance. So already, this seems like a better weapon for achieving overheat, and generally, I think that's true. It actually is a weapon I'm going to use far more frequently that just has the nice benefit of overheat, as opposed to the Thermal Lance, which doesn't do much damage, requires sustain, and its overheat only happens over time, not instantly. So I think between the 2, I generally favor the long arm in most cases, and that's another knock against this weapon. Alright, so those are some of the shortcomings of the Thermal Lance. Now that we've discussed that, we're going to talk about why it actually is a good weapon, because we did say it is good, right? And I think it actually is. So let's talk about what is good about this weapon and why it's worth using. Number 1, ease of use. This is one of those weapons that you get early game, and it's actually quite easy to pilot. Being a sustained damage weapon means that, yeah, you pretty much point and you shoot, nothing too complicated, but this one, because it's a consistent ray, it actually is really easy to see, it stays pretty well locked onto your target, and it's just actually pretty refreshing when you think about it, because a lot of the end game weapons you want to use have a little bit of a learning curve, like the missile racks, the long arms, the railgun. There's a little bit of practice that goes into getting those, so it's kind of refreshing to have a weapon that's pretty straightforward. So it's something that actually makes, piloting and using this weapon pretty fun. Number 2, ideal assist weapon. Now, there are times where you want to actually be in the assist category, whether that's what your team needs, or you're trying to do the collaborator achievement, or you're playing with team members who are higher power than you. There are actually instances where you have maybe 1500 power or 2000 power and all your other teammates have more than you, maybe like 1000 more in the 3000 power. You know, if you're trying to use your regular weapons, you're probably not going to make a huge dent in most of your opponents, and this is the perfect time to break out the assist build, and the thermal lance is a huge part of that. You'll find actually it's pretty easy to rack up the different assist achievements that you can get, and as you can see here, I mean, I went through these pretty quickly just playing the support build. I'm not going to be the one who's dealing the huge damage, but I don't have to be, and that's the beauty of using the thermal lance in this capacity. You can be super effective for your team without being the big guns, so it's a great weapon for that purpose. Number 3, great endgame weapon. Now, many of us don't think of the thermal lance as an endgame weapon. It's a common one we get early, and it's definitely not that impressive when you first get it. However, the ability for the thermal lance is the overheat 50%. Now, that doesn't make much difference for your early game weapons, but when we get to late game, there are some heavy hitting weapons that the 50% damage will actually outperform some of the other sidearms that you could put with these. For example, the build I'm running right here with my brick house is a carbine 12 and a thermal lance 6. Now, surprisingly, this does a lot of damage, and I actually have some numbers from the War Robots forums here that you can see. This shows actually, and I have the link in the description for the forum if you want to check it out yourself, that this shows that the typical carbine 8 and carbine 10 build stacked against the carbine 12 and thermal lance 6 build and their damage outputs. Now, I'm not saying that the carbine 8 and carbine 10 is a bad build, but when you look at these numbers, the carbine 12 and the thermal lance 6 actually outperform its damage at certain levels. That to me is crazy to think about, because that means you can focus on just one endgame weapon of the carbine 12 instead of the other two and still output more damage than if you were to get both of those weapons while using the thermal lance 6 with it. That's pretty bonkers, right? I mean, not only that, you have to think about it like this. When you actually are in overheat mode with this, it's almost like you're running a carbine 12 with a carbine 6, plus a little bit of added damage from the thermal lance itself, plus the overheat ability that it drops so that the rest of your team can actually kill stuff fast. This really allows you to just shred through enemies. You and your team can get through even the tankiest guys super fast. This build is one that I've been running on all of my tanks. I run it on Brickhouse, I run it on Juggernaut, on Ares, I've run it on Killshot with great success too. It is surprisingly good, and I think that this weapon with some other high-end parries can really turn some heads. But this is definitely the one that shined me onto it, and one that I really recommend everyone try and give it a shot. It's quite good for both you and all your teammates. That's going to be it for the thermal lance is a good video, guys. Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to comment below on your thoughts for the thermal lance. Let me know maybe some weapon pairings that have worked for you for this weapon, or some challenges with it that you'd like me to try. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, we will see you out there on the battlefield.